In all my years playing video games, 2023 may be the best for the medium that I have ever seen. And that's a real big deal because I've been gaming for a long time and this is far from my first rodeo. I think 2023 is right there with 1994, 1997, and 98. 2001, 2004 and 5, 2009, 2017. So it may be ridiculous for me to suggest that 2023 shares such esteemed company, especially since 2023 is still going on as I write this. And I'm willing to admit that this is largely fueled by emotion. Sue me. My main motivation for making this video is that I have played more great games in this calendar year than any other I can remember. It's more than a deluge of great titles. I'm struck with how many unique and interesting experiences I came across this past year. And it's also not just that more games are being made now than in the past, resulting in a higher quantity and variety of good stuff. This feels different. There's only one game I played this year that I didn't enjoy in some aspect, which I guess is a small mercy because it saves a divide by zero error with the ratio. I'll be getting to my thoughts on all of those in a minute here, but there may be something else coloring my rosy outlook for this year. As a game developer for over 7 years now, I've seen my fair share of setbacks in my career, chief among them being the 2019 ArenaNet layoffs. But after a long and winding road, 2023 was the year that I finally saw my name in the credits of a significant game release. I am proud to have been part of the Oxenfree 2 team, being part of its development over 2 years and finally shipping the game out in July. Now, I would love to share my thoughts, but obviously I can't be impartial about it, which of course means that it would be irresponsible of me to share my opinions here. But I do hope that all of you who have played it enjoyed it, or at the very least found it interesting. And while I'm disclosing things here, I should note that this is not a review channel, and that I bought and played all of the games mentioned in this video. And yes, aside from some trailers and other press materials, all of this footage is from yours truly, so feel free to make fun of my terrible gameplay in the comments. Since I was heavily involved in the production of a video game for the first half of the year, I also didn't have the time to get around to every game that I wanted to. I will make note of some of the big omissions later on in this video, but just know that even without these, I'm still finding 2023 to be an amazing year. So here's the plan. I'm going to start with games that I thought were good, but maybe didn't do anything groundbreaking or radically new. From there, I will get into some of the games that I think are pushing the medium forward, even if they may have some rough edges or other critical flaws. Then I'll finally get to the game that is my personal least favorite game, which, trust me, is quite pertinent for my greater argument about 2023. After that, I'll make note of the games I wish I played before sharing what games epitomized the greatness of this year. Diving into our first category, let's talk about some just plain good games. I can't think of a better game that typifies just plain good than 2019's Remnant from the Ashes. Its sequel is more of the same. It's actually somewhat surprising that I like it, given that it's a Souls-light third-person shooter, but that should be a testament to just how solid this game is. There are some great designs all around Remnant 2, from the weapons, special attacks, dungeons, but the true standout for Gunfire Games is their boss design. There's also a bit more class differentiation here that really amplifies this series' hallmark co-op gameplay. While Remnant 2 isn't going to wow you with anything outlandish, it's a great time, especially if you can get a squad of friends together. Jusant is all about climbing, and to level with you, I found that really annoying for the first half of the game. It reminds me a lot of the climbing from Shadow of the Colossus, and that's not a compliment. There's a fair amount of jank here, and the wayfinding and overall level design is a bit spotty early on. But after a while, the game clicks, and flow state becomes easy. The tipping point for me was the windy area that ushers in the back half or maybe last third of the game. The overall ambiance is on point, and there's some additional narrative context for the curious, though I'm not a fan of the put everything in lore approach of text dumps in a game that is at its best when it's in constant fluid motion. All said, Jusant passes the vibe check in my book. Check it out. I feel like the deck building roguelike is a genre that quickly saturated following the landmark success of Slay the Spire. As such, it's really hard for a a game to differentiate itself in the space, but I think Astrea Six-Sided Oracles found a way. Using a custom dice system and a well-streamlined purification versus corruption combat mechanic, Astrea stands out. Add in its beautiful art style as well as good UI UX quality of life, and it makes for a very enjoyable experience indeed. If you've been searching for a good roguelike deck builder but need a new wrinkle to freshen things up for you, I think you'll find Astrea to be a strong contender. As an old Macintosh gamer and horror co-op board game enjoyer, I feel like World of Horror is laser targeted to my tastes and nostalgia. Its 1/2-bit graphics are an aesthetic that has largely gone forgotten by most retro-themed games. And if you enjoy Arkham Horror or related board games, you'll enjoy World of Horror's obvious influences of Lovecraft and Junji Ito, as well as its somewhat punishing prioritization of resource management and turn efficiency. If there's a glaring flaw for World of Horror, I would say that it adheres a bit too much to the old Mac game aesthetic with its cumbersome and unintuitive UI. But ultimately, World of Horror delivers quick, sessionable, roguelite horror experiences with compelling choices and is well worth the price of admission in my eyes. While we're talking Lovecraftian tropes here, Dredge applies them to video games' favorite pastime within a pastime: fishing. So if you're like me, a whole game of doing what most games use as a time killer doesn't sound all that appealing. But that's the absurd thing. Dredge pulls it off. There's enough design flourishes here to keep pulling fish out of the ocean for 10 hours engaging, and the wonderful sound design, music, and painterly art style come together as a satisfying and polished experience. Give it a go, you may find that you're more of a salty sea dog than you think. And rounding out our just plain good games category, we have Sea of Stars. Uh-oh, I can hear the complaints about this not being in a higher category already. Well, first of all, you may notice that I'm not ranking these games in any way. That's because I find things like that and numerical ratings for games to be rather silly, but that's another video. Second, I'm part of Generation SNES through and through, and yes, Chrono Trigger is a game that I have a strong emotional attachment to. It was the first RPG I'd ever completed on my own. So a game that is pretty much a love letter to it should be a slam dunk favorite for me, right? Well, not necessarily. Don't get me wrong though, Sea of Stars is a very good game. Its combat system is streamlined but has enough depth and complexity for its runtime. There's some really good boss and dungeon designs. The aesthetics stand on their own while also thoroughly milking the nostalgia for the wonderfully polished pixel art of the late 16-bit era. And the music, heavens, the music. Altogether, the overall production quality is off the charts. So what's my problem with Sea of Stars? For me, it's mostly about the lack of novelty and substance. I'm a bit more forgiving about nostalgia bait than most critics. In fact, I did a video where I argue that nostalgia can be used for good. But Sea of Stars doesn't offer too much more than a highly polished pastiche of old classics. I do really like that Sabotage Studio didn't just make Chrono Trigger their sole inspiration. In fact, the game I was most reminded of, both in terms of combat system and in the frequent lampshading of common JRPG tropes, was Super Mario RPG. The remake of which I haven't gotten around to yet, and also, no, I won't be including remakes in this video. Sorry to RE4 Make and Star Ocean 2 as well, I guess. I also heard that Sea of Stars draws upon Golden Sun quite a bit as well, but I haven't played that, so I can't confirm or reject that. But anyhow, I didn't really feel like Sea of Stars did much that was new, and its story was underwhelming in my opinion. It's no Final Fantasy VI if you know what I'm saying. The biggest problem is that it duplicates Chrono Trigger's empty vessel protagonist not once, but twice, giving us two main characters that are just a bit too bland. Our boy Garl certainly does his best to liven things up, and I do want to shout him out because he clearly was on the dean's list at the Samwise Gamgee School of Positive Masculinity. But unfortunately, he can't salvage it all by himself, especially Sea of Stars' very boilerplate save the world plot. But don't let all my criticisms cloud the fact that it's still a great experience. With all of this said, if you're looking for a vintage JRPG experience with high quality modern flourishes, go play Sea of Stars. There are so many just plain good games that came out this year, but I need to get moving on. So here's a lightning round of some other neat games that I stumbled on this year. Aces and Adventures brings its own unique take on using poker hands and a roguelike deck building card battler. Demonologist is essentially a fresh coat of paint on Phasmophobia, but you know what? it works. I'm dubbing the Banished Vault Survival Strategy Solitaire. It's essentially if you took a brutally difficult co-op board game like Arkham or Eldritch Horror, but distilled it into a single-player gothic sci-fi video game about a group of space nomads struggling to get by. And looking at the aesthetics, perhaps a better comp would be the synthesis of Escape the Dark Sector with Escape the Dark Castle. And finally, Venba is a touching story about cooking and intergenerational drama and the difficulties of being an immigrant family, told very efficiently and effectively in just over an hour. With our Just Plain Good games now out of the way, it's time to take a look at some interesting and fresh approaches to the medium. This is the category that I am calling Trailblazers and Curiosities. I found the Cosmic Wheel Sisterhood to be engrossing on many levels. First of all, it's queer AF, and I'm here for that. But what I find really remarkable about Cosmic Wheel Sisterhood is how it breaks up its narrative into modular choices, but still manages to piece them into a coherent mosaic at the end of the story. You play as an exiled witch, who, with a little help from an eldritch demon, creates a new deck of tarot cards. You get to compose each card from a selection of subjects, backgrounds, and accessories that interact with one another to create a set of potential interpretations for the card. NPCs will then visit you and ask for a divination, where you will draw a random card, but you get to choose which question it answers, and then which of its interpretations now applies. This in turn influences the NPC's story, and since several of the NPCs are closely intertwined, there's some fun emergent narratives that result. This is really the most impressive thing for me about Cosmic Wheel Sisterhood. Everything felt consequential, but I can't think of an instance where an outcome felt incongruent with the overarching narrative. Working on a game with branching narrative features, I know how hard it is to write, develop, test, and debug scenarios like this, but the folks at Deconstruct Team nailed it. And once I finally give up on my effort to play as many 2023 games as I can, I'm eager to return to the Cosmic Wheel Sisterhood again to see how different choices impact the story. I'm going to come right out and say it. I'm not sure if I get Book of Hours. I've played a few hours of it so far, but it hasn't quite hooked me yet. But like Cosmic Wheel Sisterhood, I see enormous potential here. In particular, Book of Hours feels like a detective mystery where you're taking fragments of knowledge and piecing together a grander puzzle. But there's a limited amount of time in the day-night cycle, meaning that you can't do everything available and that you're going to have to make some choices. If you're as interested in the ways video games can create new avenues of gameplay and storytelling as I am, then a game that sells itself as a narrative crafting RPG like Book of Hours is definitely worth checking out. And if I get some time to finish Book of Hours, I will report back on this. Inside was my favorite game of 2016, so I love that we're seeing more and more games take inspiration from it, and American Arcadia fits that bill. The primary mode of gameplay is platforming with a smattering of light stealth elements to spice things up, just as Inside does. But American Arcadia offers its own unique wrinkle to the formula. You control Trevor, who is doing most of the running, jumping, and sneaking, but you also control Angela, a hacker who is watching Trevor remotely and aiding his escape. For more context on this, American Arcadia's narrative is this pretty wacky mashup of The Matrix meets The Truman Show, set in a parody of Disney World's experimental prototype community of tomorrow, aka Epcot. So Trevor is pretty much Neo from the first act of The Matrix, with Angela acting as Trinity. It's really funny to see how many of these story beats line up, by the way. This two-character framing creates some interesting gameplay moments. Using a controller, Trevor's actions are on the left side, while Angela's tend to be on the right. There's a great moment reminiscent of the canning scene from What Remains of Edith Finch, where you're sitting at Angela's desk answering questions from the police, while you're also controlling Trevor on her other monitor. Such multitasking is straining and weird, but given that's the desired effect, it works extremely well. American Arcadia has some unique stylistic flair that's worth mentioning. It's presented as a documentary, so when we need to add in some exposition, we hard cut to interview footage of the characters recounting the events. I found this approach to be really slick, where we could quickly splice in some narrative context and then get right back to the action, but in a way that isn't jarring. This also really gels with the overall sarcastic and whimsical tone of the game. And on that front, American Arcadia has some things to say about wage labor, the idyllic fantasy of the American middle class, and the perniciousness of social media. It's definitely a worthwhile way to spend 8 hours of your time, so if any of what I said just piques your interest, you should check it out. Sometimes all you need is a mechanic based on some jaw-dropping tech to make a compelling experience, but Viewfinder is much more than that. The gimmick here is that you can take pictures of the world and move or rotate those pictures and reverse the process, essentially allowing you to copy and paste chunks of the 3D world around you. Viewfinder puts this to great use as a puzzle platformer in the vein of Portal. If I have a small critique of Viewfinder, it's that sometimes its puzzle progression feels a bit disjointed. You'll do one puzzle that requires some considerable flexing of your lateral thinking skills, but then you'll be presented with something that is trivial in comparison. Overall, I found it to be a simply delightful experience, though some might take umbrage with its short runtime of around 4 hours. For me, that's a feature and not a bug. I always appreciate media that understands the adage, leave the audience wanting more, and I especially appreciate a game not overstaying its welcome in a year overflowing with other great games to play. In my previous video, I took a look at the curious phenomenon that is troll design and made an argument for why it's pushing game design forward. And a huge impetus for creating that video was Super Wagon World, a Super Mario Maker 2 super world put together over 3 years by the SMM troll community, which finally debuted in February of this year. So this one goes out to the wonderful folks in the Bandwagon team and all the other troll creators and players. Nope, I haven't forgotten about you, y'all are lovely. And yes, I'm including fan content in this video, deal with it. Troll levels are obviously not for everyone, and one point I wish I emphasized more in my video is that there's a vital precondition to playing them: consent. Be warned that if you play this super world, you will be clowned on. And don't go foisting these on unsuspecting people. I believe the technical term for that is a real dick move. But if taking the game design equivalent of a pie to the face sounds fun to you, I can't think of a better place to start than Super Wagon World. It's a retrospective covering the ongoing evolution of troll levels in Mario Maker from their more than a little rough around the edges origins to the complex and elaborate gags of today. It's an outstanding effort that could only be done by a community of passionate creators. And again, I think we're witnessing the medium progress forward through the playful subterfuge of common game design assumptions seen here. Last but certainly not least in this category is the phenomenal Chants of Sennaar. Other games have taken stabs at language as mechanic before, usually employing ciphers and the like. Chants of Sennaar, however, cleverly develops the symbology and limited vocabulary for each of 5 fictional languages. The main game loop reminds me of this bit from the always wonderful CJ the X.
Everyone knows how to actually learn a language, right? It's not Duolingo, you just move to the country and try not to die.
You find yourself in a strange place where you don't know the local tongue, but by cross-referencing and using context clues, you can decipher the meaning of particular symbols. As you progress through the game, you can also leverage the knowledge you gained about prior languages to fill in the gaps. It makes for one hella addicting puzzle-solving gameplay loop that I really can't do justice by explaining. You're just going to have to experience it yourself. What really impressed me was the optional content in Chants of Sennaar, which involves NPCs from 2 different cultures chatting with one another. It's up to you as the player to use your knowledge of the various languages and interpret for both sides of the conversation. This doesn't just involve matching the semantic meaning of the sentence, but figuring out how to convert the syntax as well. For instance, knowing how each language pluralizes nouns, or the ordering of subjects, objects, and verbs in a sentence. I'm no language nerd, but that tickled my brain in the best way. Chants of Sennaar also has a beautiful narrative whose payoff left me in tears. I don't want to spoil anything, but given the gameplay is about solving language barriers, you can make some educated guesses for yourself. I found the game to be compelling in almost all regards, and thus I can't recommend it enough. So I know YouTube loves some negativity, thus we've finally arrived at the part of the video you've all been waiting for. This is the worst game of 2023. Final Fantasy XVI is the worst game I played this year, and that's saying something. Mostly good things, though, don't worry. To be clear, I don't think Final Fantasy XVI is a bad game, merely a disappointing one. And yeah, I know there were some absolute clunkers out there that are far more worthy of this title, but I didn't play them. The word that comes to mind when thinking of Final Fantasy XVI is superfluous. There's just so much about this game that feels unnecessary and tacked on. And in my opinion, FF16's biggest problem is this subtraction by addition. This game would be far better if it took out or scaled back many of these aspects to make for a tighter, more focused experience. Most egregious for me is the runtime. I did practically no side quests or extra content in this game, and it took me 34 hours to complete. Honestly, I feel this game could have achieved what it set out to do, both in terms of gameplay and storytelling, in half that time. Simply put, the pacing is bad in both the macro and micro scales of FF16. Quests and scenes are frequently partitioned up with multiple segments where we have to move back and forth between very short distances, and those transitions pile up. On the macro scale, the middle of the game gets clogged up with set the controller down geopolitics lectures, aka exposition dumps, and literal fetch quests to find chip parts as part of the main path of progress. While we're talking quests, FF16 has some of the most uninspired quest design I've seen in a long while. All the most trite and tired pablum is here. Fetch and kill quests that would be embarrassing to see in a modern MMO, let alone a single-player RPG. It also doesn't help that the game systems leave no place to incentivize side quests. Specifically, the impact of gear upgrades are extremely marginal. I doubt I would notice something like an extra 10 points of attack. So if a side quest doesn't offer anything new there, and nothing new in terms of story, what's the point of doing them? And again, the small details are similarly befuddling. What's the purpose of this interface, for instance? I can't think of any situation where I would want to withhold turning in quest items to an NPC, or where I would want to turn in a partial set when I had all of the requirements. This whole dialogue is just gumming up the works and yet again padding the runtime. Taking a quick pause here to note that there's some potential spoilers up ahead, but more importantly, I'll be using clips from some rather intense scenes. You should be seeing some content notes about those right now. So if any of that is potentially upsetting for you, I recommend you skip to the timestamp shown here. Alright, onward. I am relieved to report that Final Fantasy XVI's story is not as bad as I thought it was going to be. In the time leading up to its launch, though, it looked to be headed down a bleak path. Fortunately, the supposed chudification of Final Fantasy didn't really happen here. That said, the narrative still trips up in some frustrating ways. Most notably, the game depicts fantasy racism in a manner that seems well-intentioned, but is ultimately insensitive to the realities of bigotry and prejudice. In fact, for better or worse, the game decides to move on from that particular theme after a while, which is another criticism I have. The game loves to bring in dark and gritty themes to add gravity and realism to its plot, but it doesn't really seem to want to critically engage with those themes, dropping them the moment they become inconvenient. Again, superfluous. FF16 also seems to be is inspired by Game of Thrones. To a fault. Clive is Jon Snow, Joshua is Bran Stark, their mother is Cersei Lannister, we've got a climate change allegory, there's 5 kingdoms worth of political intrigue, so on and so on. What does it all mean? Not much, unfortunately, other than trying to make the plot feel more grounded than it actually is. In the end, it's just a lot of world-building wankery. I could go on and talk about subjects like how the game doesn't seem to like women all that much, or how its combat is just a button-mashing cluster, but I see no reason to spend much more of this video on it. If you'd like me to go in depth on why Final Fantasy XVI was such a massive disappointment, well, let me know down in the comments and hit that subscribe button because I might just be filling up for it. The quick and dirty synopsis for FF16 is this. It's trying to be a prestige AAA narrative like the new God of War or The Last of Us, but it's worse in just about every facet imaginable. Again, it's not awful by any means, but compared to the smorgasbord of quality games that came out this year, it stood out for the wrong reasons. And since I unfortunately wasted 34 hours of my life on Final Fantasy XVI, I didn't have time to play the following games. These are the ones that got away. Before you go running down to the comments to whine that any of these games aren't on my list, just know that my impression of all of these games is that they're great in at least one way or another. And let me assure you, there is no one more bummed out that I didn't have the time to play these games than me. Such is the life of a game dev. Anyhow, in no particular order, here are the games that I just couldn't get to this year. The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom, Octopath Traveler 2, Thirsty Suitors, Spider-Man 2, The Talos Principle 2, Salt Sea Chronicles, Alan Wake 2, Armored Core 6, Fires of Rubicon, Blasphemous 2, Cobalt Core, Hi-Fi Rush, Dave the Diver, Lies of P, Like a Dragon Gaiden, The Man Who Erased His Name. Now, if you've got a game that you think should be anywhere in this video, I'm all ears, especially if it's a bit more niche or indie. But without further ado, here are the games that I consider to be the best of 2023. For the first few hours, I thought Bramble the Mountain King was a just plain good game. Another horror platformer like Inside or Little Nightmares, but not much more than that. But as I kept playing, it got better and better. It certainly takes inspiration from those other games, and maybe a bit more if we're being honest, but by the end, it manages to leave its own unique impression. Bramble makes great use of Nordic folklore to create a delightfully dreadful dark fairy tale vibe, taking storybook sensibilities and distorting them through a horror lens. It combines this with competent third-person platforming and a few accents of stealth and puzzle gameplay to keep things engaging. But what took me by surprise about Bramble was its boss fights, which were executed quite well in my opinion. And while the character models for the children are a bit uncanny, overall the aesthetics and graphics are another point in Bramble's favor. One thing I want to note is how Bramble's delivery really sells both the fantastical whimsy and, more importantly, the grounded and relatable human element of folklore. Throughout this game, we see emotions and behaviors like rage, obsession, despair, paranoia, ostracization, and so forth turn tragic and become poisonous, tearing apart communities and making monsters of ordinary people. There's something about playing through the aftermath of these tales that makes them hit differently, something about the magic of play that further heightens the experience far more than watching or reading it ever could. And yes, they do play in the Hall of the Mountain King in this game, and it's quite a glorious adaptation at that. My next entry for the best of 2023 is Cocoon, which is probably unsurprising as I've made clear my love for Inside and also its precursor Limbo, and Cocoon was directed by the lead gameplay designer for both of those games, Jeppe Carlsen. Cocoon is a puzzle game that starts off deceptively simple, but it contains one of the most clever gimmicks I've ever seen in a game, which it reveals in due time. Cocoon also stresses a very minimalist approach to narrative and aesthetics, which is not for everyone, but I enjoy quite thoroughly, especially the synthy soundtrack. It's also got some boss fights which are a nice break from the puzzle solving, but aren't really all that remarkable onto themselves. My one complaint with Cocoon is that it takes a bit too long to get to the goods. That is, you're going to have to wade through some pretty bog standard puzzle design before you get to the really awesome mind-bending stuff. But once you get there, there's a good chance that Cocoon will blow your doors off. There's two puzzle solutions that damn near broke my brain, which I have no desire to spoil, so apologies that I can't thoroughly dissect them here. But suffice to say, I found them to be some of the most ingeniously designed puzzles that I've ever encountered in my 34 plus years of gaming. And like so many other games I'm recommending in this video, Cocoon is a brisk 4 to 5 hour journey. That's a good thing. A good thing! Super Mario Bros. Wonder is the best 2D Mario in 30 years. Yes, I realize that's maybe not as bold of a proclamation as it might seem, but I do think Wonder is the best that Nintendo's done with the franchise since Super Mario World. And if I'm being cheeky, I think it's better than SMW in many ways. I also realize that I might be bulldozing Yoshi's Island in these statements, but that begs the question, is Yoshi's Island a Mario game? I'll let you all debate that in the comments. What's striking about Wonder is how each and every level has its own gimmick, centered around the Wonder Seeds, which drastically alter the gameplay. Sometimes it turns Mario into a rolling boulder. Sometimes it changes the perspective from side-scroller to top-down. Sometimes it transforms the whole stage into a musical number. The Wonder Seeds are just pure, unbridled gaming joy that should resuscitate your inner child no matter how dead or lost it may be. None of these gameplay alterations are anything new, but what is noteworthy is just how Wonder is jam-packed with them from start to finish. Every stage feels fresh and unique, and we even get tried and true Mario staples like secret exits and a bonus world if you want even more. Though, as that dang dad points out in his video, beware this wall jumping stage unless you're in a very calm and patient head state.
Same with the new Special World in Mario Wonder. The Special World has the hardest levels in the game, and I've beaten all of them except for Climb to the Beat. I tried it, I kid you not, 100 times. Couldn't do it, turned on cheats, f*** you, I win.
Wonder also introduces some light online co-op elements, which are carefully considered to prevent griefing, making for fun and wholesome little moments like giving another player a power-up, or everyone waiting up to touch the flagpole at the same time. For my entire time playing it, Super Mario Bros. Wonder left me with a smile on my face. Except for that frickin' wall jump stage! A nearly perfect 2D Mario experience. To the surprise of absolutely no one, Baldur's Gate 3 is my last entry for the best of 2023. I don't think I have too much to add in terms of analysis on BG3, but here's what stood out to me anyhow. First, I can't think of a game that better embodies quantity has a quality all its own than this game. We tend to think of video game content as quests, dungeons, boss fights, and so on, but Baldur's Gate 3 shows us that you can pack content everywhere. What immediately comes to mind to me, and probably you, is how many conversations you can have using the Speak with Animals spell. Larian invested so much detail into NPCs and environments that this game just feels so immersive and alive. And as someone who has worked on branching narrative and optional but impactful content, I know this game must have been a beast to debug. And yeah, more than a few bugs snuck into the finished product. But given the scale and scope of this game, I think we all gave it its well-deserved affordances in this regard. And this Gordian knot of interacting consequences also speaks to how thoughtful and considerate the writing of this game is. It was great to see NPCs at various points of their parallel journeys with my party, and see them treated as richly drawn characters in their own right. Or to see the consequences of my past actions finally catch up to me, both good and bad. I would be remiss to not mention the more intimate fun that Baldur's Gate 3 has become known for. I think as a medium, video games have been long overdue to have their own sensual revolution of sorts, and BG3 is leading the vanguard here. We've had objectification in games for a long time, but that's not the same thing now, is it? We're talking about two or more consenting adults engaging in the act of, Congress, which video games have been very hesitant to tackle overall. And if they have, they've erred on the side of discretion. So BG3's enthusiastic embrace of intimacy is a breath of fresh air in this regard, especially since it does so in a manner that is queer inclusive and accepting of ethical non-monogamy. It is by no means perfect about all this, but I think video games need to expand to include all facets of the human experience, and this peculiar facet is something most people partake in. And if you don't, you're cool. I see you ace folks out there. Suffice to say, this is a great start. Others have brought it up, but it's worth bringing up again. Larian has been providing all kinds of content patches and additions to Baldur's Gate 3 without selling any DLC or microtransactions. For instance, because the ending of the game was a bit abrupt originally, they created a little denouement in a recent patch, free of charge. That shouldn't be remarkable, but it is when you consider that the game industry is so enthralled by the capitalist imperative to wring every red cent out of its customers. Baldur's Gate 3 is a shining example of what a big budget production should be, and it is the perfect capstone for 2023, the year of the game. Thanks for sticking all the way to the end, and special thanks to the close to 5,000 of you who subscribed to the channel this year. I've got big plans for the new year, including a sprawling examination of video games' favorite monsters, zombies, that I'm aiming for spooky season 2024. But before then, it's time to close the book on a recurring gag on this channel by sending it off with a bang. I've made it a running joke to shoehorn Final Fantasy VI mentions into all my videos, and a part of that comes from the fact that the very first video that I wanted to do here was a close examination of Final Fantasy VI. Well, the time has come, as FF6 will be 30 years old next year, so I'm going to make it the only video you'll ever need to watch about it, but not really. Look for it in early April, hopefully on the anniversary, but again, this is a hobby and my real job can get really demanding sometimes. I have some other videos, and particularly a video series that I'm tinkering around with as well, but my primary focus is going to be on these two behemoths. So be sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell so you know when those come out. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and I hope you have a happy new year.